Coming up, what an excellent day for a really big stick. Well, howdy folks, and welcome to Minute 29 of the Exorcist Minute, a show where we endeavor to examine, extrapolate, and excavate the Exorcist minute by terrifying minute. My name is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we'll be your holy guides on this journey through what some have called the scariest movie of all time. So, our minute begins with Chris waking up even though she thought she had just gone to bed.
And it ends with Chris grabbing a stick.
A stick. What is that stick for? Now, the first part of this minute is pretty dark. I mean, literally dark, not figuratively dark. We can't see because the lights are still off. If you'll remember from the previous minute, Chris has just been awoken by the phone. If that extremely hard to see red clock on the mantle is right, then it's a little after 6:30 in the morning. Although with Captain Howdy already so firmly entrenched in this house by now, who knows what time it is? He seems to like messing with clocks, as we know. Mm-hmm. In any case, Chris struggles to get up, and I gotta say, as an older man now in his late 30s who has a harder and harder time getting out of bed in the morning, I feel every bit of acting she's doing with my bones. She really does look exhausted here.
But that's how you describe yourself now, as an older man?
Yes, as an older man in my late 30s, yeah. I don't say 39, I say late 30s because that sounds younger. But yeah, no. Chris MacNeil in this scene is, as my students would say, a mood. I'm pretty sure I'm using that correctly. Gen Z, if you're listening, theexorcistminute@gmail.com. Write in and tell us if we're cool. Please, we need to know. I am under the impression that I'm extremely cool, so here's your chance to make an older person cry. Just don't call me a boomer. I'm not a boomer. I'm a millennial, and that's no cap.
Please write us to say that we're cool. If you can write and say that we're not cool, which is fine, but Lester will read that and I will not read it. I don't read them.
Okay, so this is not a call from Howard because he's a scumbag.
Yeah, great fake out. I mean, yeah. I've been rewatching this minute a couple times today just to get into this. And every time I'm like, okay, here she is on the phone. Here the phone rings. Oh, it's going to be Howard, but it never is, no matter how many times I watch it.
Yeah. This is a wake-up call for Chris. Again, literally, not figuratively. Although, maybe it's... remember, she's an actor, right? She's working on location here in Washington. She's still shooting that movie from the earlier minutes. Mr. Smith Goes to Vietnam with Mr. Chips, that movie, right? They're doing scene 61. And Chris says to remind Flo about the blue belt. We assume she's talking about an article of costume, not an exceptionally good martial artist, although you do have to remember about those. Now, in this shot, we also have what I believe is our third photo of Reagan, or maybe it's the first one, but we get to see it a little bit closer. We saw one. So.
I think it's the same one, yeah.
Yeah. We saw it back in minute 11 when we first got introduced to Chris, and we saw her room. Only now we get to see it up close. And listeners, what is Reagan doing in this photo? She's got her hands clasped together, almost as if she's praying, or perhaps asking for help, or maybe both. Once again, she's looking at us, and she's not smiling. Not a lot of smiling photos in this house, I'm noticing. Reminds me of those old Victorian photos where no one ever smiled. Keenan, do you know why they didn't smile in the photos?
I believe it was to do with looking upper class, right? So it was lower class people once photography had sort of been democratized and everyone can get it. It was your attempt to sort of have the kind of family portrait you would see of upper class people, and they would not smile. I'm not smiling. I'm upper crust. I have nothing to smile about. Right? I have no joys.
Yes,
right. I have land. I don't need joys.
Yeah, I have more things to smile about, but I'm still not smiling. I can't be bothered. I have people to do that for me. Right. There's a lot of pseudo factoids floating around. Some say it was due to poor dental work at the time.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Some say it was because old cameras took a really long time to take the picture. And some say that the first photos, people were still treating them like paintings, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of like in what you were saying, it was like, oh, this is a painting, so we got to be all serious and austere, right?
That's what I had heard, but the other ones make perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So probably a combination of all of them, right? I imagine it's all of these things. I imagine they didn't know how to treat the first photos, right? They tried to have it be like a painting, right?
Mhm.
But also, like, it's hard to hold a smile even now when people take photos, right? And they're always like, "Oh, let me take a bunch," and after a while, your face hurts, right? So I can only imagine trying to hold a smile for like an old timey camera, right, or a painting for that matter.
There's a
Um,
web comic. I wish I remembered which. I read a lot of web comics, too many web comics, and I can't remember all the names of them, unfortunately. But there's a great one that's the world's first color photograph, and
oh,
it says, "Smile, it's the world's first color photograph." And then they develop it, and they have red eyes.
ah.
And so the photographer goes, "They're witches," and they burn them at the stake. And then he develops the next set of photos. He's like, "Oh no."
We made a mistake. I love that. But in any case, I think these photos of Reagan are significant. I want to try to keep track of them.
Right. You pointed out when we first saw this photo that it sort of shows how much Reagan is always on Chris's mind, right? And that she has her as a center of the world, as an excellent mother. But now you're talking about them, because these things change. Symbols don't have fixed meaning; they have
Right.
contextual meaning, and they
Yes.
shift throughout the course of a work, especially a time-based work like a film or a play or a novel.
Mhm.
And so now you're talking about it's not just Chris who's looking at Reagan; it's Captain Howdy or whoever Captain Howdy is.
Yeah, yeah. And also, we could say that like Chris is not noticing that, like the photos, like you say, the photo didn't change, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what the photo is trying to say to us, like in this scene, has kind of changed, right? Like,
Right.
like in both of the, like in the previous minute, we have the photo suspended over fire, and in this minute, she's like begging, she's praying, and Chris isn't noticing, right? Because of
Right.
course, again, like I said, the photo didn't change, but like the mood around the photo has changed, right?
Yes, and we've blocked a little bit of it with this lamp. And the one above the fire, we have trouble tracking Chris or Reagan's eyes because the door frame kind of just as we start to look at her eyes, as you say, it's a little blurry, out of focus,
Yeah.
and then the door sort of blocks us from it just when we might get an idea of what we're seeing.
Right, right. And so Chris hangs up the phone and has some more business here, which I really appreciate. She's sort of like rubbing her face with her hands, and then her hands like jerk out for just a moment, right? Like, what is my life, right? In this, like, it is this just like sleepiness, or like did she take something before, like a sleeping pill or some wine, or was she just up really late, right? From the cut, we're assuming this is the next day, right? So the day after Reagan's birthday, you don't party that hard for like a 14-year-old kid's birthday, right?
Right, that's a really good point. I want to talk about how the bed sheets have changed here to now they're this bright yellow. So previously they had been. I went back and looked because we're doing this sort of work. Chris's bed sheets had been a different shade of yellow, a less bright shade of yellow, and they had stripes on them instead. And then in the previous moment, when we saw Reagan go to her bed, we had seen them before as being blue bed sheets, and now they're white bed sheets. And that's just the kind of thing, I work with a lot of student filmmakers, and I teach occasionally production design, art direction whenever we don't have a production design or art direction teacher with us, as I'm not a professional in that realm, but I do teach a lot of students that. And there's this inclination of students to just always match, always have the exact same thing. Like, oh, people are going to notice continuity, mistakes or errors, etc. And this is a movie that's taking place over several weeks. So logically, there could be different bed sheets, but again, that's the wrong question about what color the bed sheet should be. The question should be about the feeling that they have, the emotionality of it. So I just want to point that out, that, yeah, they are different sheets from scene to scene. Not something an audience notices at all, but they feel the difference in color, in warmth, in brightness, and tone, and shape, and all of those things. And we're only noticing when we're picking the movie apart. So I think oftentimes people who are new to filmmaking, or maybe don't want to be filmmakers, but just want to watch movies, when they start to really look into the weeds of how a movie is made, they find these quote unquote mistakes, continuity errors, all they can think about. At first, it's something you have to push past because that's not something that audiences care one whit about.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah. I see. Now I'm curious about like what means the deeper yellow or the blue or the white, or
Yeah, color theory is very difficult. So color is so impactful on us. I tend to subscribe to the ideas of Bruce Block, who is a film visual theorist,
Okay.
and he says that we overthink color too much because it gives us so many feelings. So
like I'm doing right now.
Yeah, it's completely understandable. Completely understandable. Yellow must mean caution and red must mean passion. Or, just take about how we think of red. What does red mean? Red means blood. And I go, oh, and then you go, yeah, sure, of course. But then I could also say red means love. And you go, yes, of course.
Yes.
So how could it be both of those things? Well, it does mean both of those things contextually, right?
Right.
So, if you could say that red is fire, blood, passion, stopping, love, compassion, all of those things.
And then in other cultures even, right? Like we talk about like it meaning luck or happiness or something like that, right?
Right. So anyways, Bruce Bloch talks about simplifying color theory, not necessarily thinking about it symbolically, but look at this basically as being, look how warm it is when Chris and Reagan are in the bed together. It just looks happier and brighter, right? That's something simple and to the point. Bruce Bloch likes to point out that, we have all these different shades of colors that an interior designer or an art director should probably know the color of paint, right? The difference between eggshell or taupe or chartreuse, whatever chartreuse is, or puce. But he says, no, look, there's only bright red and dark red. We've made up this word called pink. But there's maroon, scarlet, etc. No, it's either bright red or dark red, or some darker than dark, lighter than light. That's all we're looking at, right? Not to get too crazy into it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think there's some professionals who need to know that, but he's talking about like directors, producers, writers, critics. Like there's you don't have to go too far into it.
Yeah. And I mean, like maybe when you're at the place picking out the specific color, you need to know the actual name for it. But
yes, and I think a costume designer and art director should probably have a pretty good idea of it.
Yeah,
right.
But for the sake of the design, like you're thinking in your head, dark red, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how much you need to tell your designer if you're the director or producer with the specific Pantone color of the year names.
Right. Interesting. So Chris reaches over across the bed, and we see that Reagan is in bed with her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is so tiny, I almost didn't mention it, but the book has this interaction being like really sweet. Like Chris discovers her in the bed and is like, well, hey, what are you doing in here, you little rascal, you little bareface, you little stinkbot? No,
you smelly child.
No, she doesn't say that. But she's like, hey, what are you doing here? And, Reagan says that her bed is shaking, and Chris is like, oh, you nut. Mm-hmm. Like it's like a pleasant thing to wake up to. It's like, well, hey, like, good morning. And I know she's not like annoyed with Reagan in the movie, in this version, but like I know she's like annoyed with the world, I guess, right? She's just trying to wake up, but I don't know. It just kind of like stood out. Like she's like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, well, in the book, she wakes up on her own. In the movie, she's awoken by a phone call.
Oh, good point.
Right. And so, it doesn't need to be this soft, sweet moment where the movie entirely stops and we have to, reiterate again what a great mom she is. Like, we still can understand that when we watch the movie.
If anybody hasn't figured it out yet, Chris is a really good mom.
There's lines from Stephen Sondheim's songs from Company. Do you know Company?
No.
There's a song called Being Alive, which is a really big show tune. Even if you haven't seen the show, you might have heard of. But he sings at the end about what it means to be married, because he's not married. The whole play is everyone trying to get him to marry someone and settle down with a girl. And one of the things he says, he's like, someone to pull me up short and make me complete, and all these things. And one of the things he says is someone to ruin my sleep. That's what it is to be married to someone, to share a bed with someone. And I think that is so true. But my boyfriend was in town for the week for Thanksgiving. He lives out of state, and yesterday I could not get to sleep. It took me so long to get used to him being back in the bed. It does every single time. And then yesterday when he was gone again, it took me forever to fall asleep without him.
Oh. Keenan Mark is awesome. He's so
I
great.
love Mark. He's the best.
He's great.
He is the best.
Yeah. And maybe that's a thing, right? Like maybe Blatty writes these scenes a little too sweet, right? He's got Karis helping the homeless man out. He's got Chris and Reagan interacting in this almost like picture perfect Hollywood way, like, oh, I do love you, that kind of thing. And maybe Friedkin is dialing it back a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think that the more you point that out about the adaptation, I think we could start to see what a director does. More than just just little things like composition, like what the camera's pointing at, where it's pointing at. Like there's this really hard to place intangible thing that directors do when they're working with the actors that can heavily influence what the received meaning of it is, even if they're doing the exact same thing that Blatty has written. So yeah, I think it's fascinating looking at the book and then the script and then seeing how the actors perform them again, with Friedkin working with them and dialing that back. And his movies tend to be pretty cold. The French Connection, that is not, even though it's a movie, you could say it's a buddy cop movie because it's about two cops who are going out and solving this case, but they are not close friends. And that's, again, not just the script. You could do so much with the direction, even if they're not talking about the game that they watched over the weekend. You could do so much with to make them just in looks look across each other like, this is my guy, this is my buddy, this is my partner. Completely removed from that. That movie ends very coldly. I don't want to talk about the ending of that movie with spoilers, but like that movie ends on a sour, unfulfilled note, for an action film. And I think that's where Friedkin wants to go.
Interesting. So that's a nice little kind of like yin and yang, Friedkin and Blatty there, right? Like they kind of balance each other out there,
right? Where it works together. That makes me think of the Book of Mormon, where you have the guys who wrote South Park, writing the Book of Mormon, and then you also have the guys who did Avenue Q and Bobby Lopez, who is this composer who has now won a couple Oscars for the songs from Coco and Frozen. And it's like you put them together in that piece and you do something, the Book of Mormon, that neither of them could do on their own. Right. You wouldn't think that these two things should gel together at all. And they do. It's like, oh, it's transcendent. It is as good as anything you'll see in the theater. Because if it was just the South Park boys, they wouldn't get to the actually emotional, like moving conclusions that the Book of Mormon does. And if you didn't have the South Park guys and it was just Bobby Lopez, it might be a little too schmaltzy. His wife, what is Robert Lopez's wife's name? Kristen Anderson Lopez. She says that when Bobby Lopez wrote the lyrics to Frozen, to Let It Go, that all the lyrics that he wrote are the ones that sound like a drag queen.
Oh, really?
So this is like the kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. She says that's all of Bobby's lines are the drag queen lines. The sort of a little bit too schmaltzy, a little bit too emotional, but you need both of those things for them to work, right?
Oh wow! Huh. Talking about people working well together.
And you get Let It Go. I guess that's by comparison. That's the utmost in art that I was just coming up with in my comparison. You get all these disparate people together, and then you get the song Let It Go.
Well, we're gathering so many things that compel us for this minute, I think. I was going to say, it's like, talk about people working together. And here we are, you and me, Keenan, we're doing this show. This is awesome. And I think, this is so gushy. I was trying to work it in organically and now it just sounds pandering.
Perfect. Keep that in. That's exactly what we're trying to talk about.
Just don't cut that out at all. Okay.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Okay. Yeah. What I'm trying to say, Keenan, is I like that we're doing this show.
I do too. It's Thanksgiving time when we're recording this right now, and I feel thankful for you and for being on your show. It's really great. We haven't said this yet to everybody. I keep saying we're going to say this. Lester does all the work for the show. Oh no. Lester does literally everything. He has the workflow for the notes as they are, not quite scripts but notes. He has the episode order. He does all the editing. He has the recording equipment, the studio. All of that is him. The Gmail account and the social medias, it's all him. And I get to just show up and like Chris MacNeil and like wipe my eyes at 10 in the morning. Oh my god, what's happening today? Minute 61. Okay, God, all right.
The episode order. Are you going to say I'm great for doing the episode? It's a movies by minute thing, Keenan.
But literally, I have to be like, what is it? And he's like, oh, it's that scene where. Oh yeah, okay, great. Like I Lester thinks ahead. I haven't had to do any of that, any thinking ahead at all.
Well, thank you. And guys, Keenan carries it. There have been times when like I've messaged him and I've been like, I don't know what to talk about in this minute.
Of course, we got it.
Yeah. So he helps me out immensely there. Hey, Bobby, what was your favorite episode of the Exorcist Minute? I really like when they just talked about how great each of them was, and it was awesome.
I looked up the Exorcist Minute, and I was really glad it was two friends talking about how much they love each other. That's exactly what I wanted.
Did they talk about the movie? No, they just talked about how awesome they were.
They talked about some movies, not that movie.
Yeah, they talked about every movie except
every
that
other
movie.
It really sounded like they wanted to talk about The Godfather, but they weren't allowed to, or The Shining, and they weren't allowed to.
We're going to get this Godfather bit in, I tell you.
Right.
One way or another. Oh, God. Okay. Anyway, okay, so yeah, Reagan explains that her bed was shaking, and almost as if on cue or by the hands of an expert cutter, we cut to a shot of the attic door and that familiar crash from before. And a lot has happened between now and when we first heard that crash. So we're like, oh yeah, that crash. There's something in the attic. And I love the Amazon subtitles here. It just says rattle, rattle in parentheses, like all caps, like not faint rattling or even just rattling. It's just like Amazon wants you to think the hamburger is up there, right? So,
rattle.
Yeah, rattle. Is Captain Howdy a Pokemon? Is that the thing? Like, is Father Marin's story that he didn't catch them all? Okay.
You know, I believe on this show, again, I don't remember because Lester does all this. I believe on the show, I talked about how I had this revelation a couple years ago that we all could name more Pokemons than senators. Did I talk about this in the show?
I think we mentioned it, yeah.
I saw a counter argument to that, which is that if senators, had just look in the camera and say their own name to you, like Chris Murphy, Connecticut Democrat, Chris Murphy, Connecticut Democrat, then you might know the senator's name.
Keenan, are you ushering in a new genre of political commercials?
Right, it's just name recognition, right? Name recognition goes so far in politics. They say when you're in the booth. So if you read Psyduck, you'd be like, I know Psyduck. He's been around for a while. Let me vote for Psyduck.
Yep, that's the only name I know on this list, right?
Right, for state comptroller, whatever the hell that is, Psyduck can do it.
I don't know if I particularly agree with Meowth's policies, but it's such a catchy name.
Right, if it was like Meowth from the fascist anti-American party, you'd still be like, I like that name, Meowth.
Meowth, right? He's so cute with his little whiskers.
Fascism, that's right.
Oh my God. Meowth. That would be Meowth's party. No, anyway.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. But no, Chris goes out into the hall, and I love this shot where she's in shadow and then she sort of walks into the light, and you see on her face this look of, I don't know, it's like, all right, enough's enough. Time to get to the bottom of this, right? Mm-hmm. She's got her eyes on that attic door as she's moving, and we see that she reaches for a stick, right? Mm-hmm. And that is where our minute ends. What's she going to use that stick for? We'll have to wait and see.
Oh, I did want to talk about expressionistic lighting, if we could.
Okay.
So you really like this lighting here. I like this lighting. This, in this sequence, looks more like a horror film than we've seen before, right? These scenes where she's going up into the attic are the ones that look most like a horror film so far.
Yeah,
If you thought about, like, if you asked your AI to draw you a scene from a horror film, what would it have? It'd have some angles that we wouldn't necessarily be seeing from any particular person's point of view, right? And we would have high contrast lighting, and the lighting would make strange shapes on the walls. We'd have areas that fall into complete darkness. So we have really, really high contrast ratios in the lighting. And we have lighting sources that are not glamorous. Here we have a light from below Chris.
Right.
That we would call a low key light. So the key light is the light that is, there's different ways of defining it depending on what school you're going to or which photography teacher you have. But the key light is usually, don't write into me cinematographers, I'm trying to simplify. The key light is usually the brightest light on a subject, so a person's face. And so if the key light is below them like this, sort of like where you're putting a flashlight under your face to do a ghost story.
Right. This is the typical ghost story lighting.
Right. This is a low key light. And that's what typically we see in horror films. If we had the opposite, say we had a light on top of them, say like in an interrogation room scene, that would be a high key light. So high key lighting,
Interesting.
low key lighting.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what we think of as being horror film lighting, which is so key to a horror film, really comes to us through German Expressionism, which is the major film movement and major art movement in Germany of the late 1910s and the 1920s and early 1930s. So basically the period between World War I and the rise of Hitlerism. Nazism. It's called German Expressionism, and the base. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to presume. Do you know German Expressionism from
I mean,
theater?
I keep hearing it mentioned. The first thing that I think of is like the Addams Family,
Oh yeah,
or something like that, like very kind of like gothic, like pointy,
right.
spires and like very washed out grays and things like that, like very very kind of um, like intimidating, like tall, pointy shapes, things like that.
Yeah, actually, yeah, great. Tall, pointy shapes. Yeah, so very basically, and we spend a lot of time on this in film history classes, so I'll try to do it even faster than, than we do it there. But basically, the idea is that Germany was the strongest country in the world going up to World War I, and then they lost World War I terribly, right? Tons of deaths, the destruction of their government, the destruction of their money, their economy, and then the destruction of their prestige. Right, they were to blame for World War I after the Treaty of Versailles, and they
literally had to sign like responsibility for it.
Yeah, exactly, and pay for it forever. And so that was a huge break in the German psyche, not just the politics of it and losing the war. It was like proof that, hey, all these lies we've been telling ourselves about how we're the center of the world and in terms of politics and technology and economy and culture are not true. And so you start seeing in German art, which is in architecture, painting, theater, dance, and then in film, these sharp, pointy shapes appearing, and the basic metaphor of them is a shard, as if the world as we know it had been broken apart into a million pieces, and the world that we had to build afterwards was one of shards, broken glass, reconfigured ideas. So in film, we have this idea of German Expressionism, and there's a movie called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is not the first German Expressionist film, but is the earliest one that we tend to go back and look at, that people will still watch for fun. And we have houses that are completely jagged, and they look like Escher before Escher, basically. And houses don't stand up straight. They're all crooked and bajankety. And they knew that shadow was going to be something that they wanted to do, and that's something that they had been playing with in theater, in German Expressionism in theater. But in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and early German Expressionist films, they didn't quite have the electrical light capacity, so they just painted shadows in jagged shapes onto the set. Yeah, and it's a really interesting looking film if you want to take a look at that, Caligari.
Okay, yeah, and everybody else, out there, check out.
Really
Cabinet
wonderful.
of Dr. Caligari. Yeah,
great movie. And then that leads to German Expressionism, where we start, when we do have lighting, we start playing up cinematography to give us the inner lives of characters, essentially. And so we have like Nosferatu, which is that bootleg version of Dracula.
Right.
And Metropolis, which is a sci-fi version of that. And some of the best movies ever made are from Germany in the 1920s, as they're trying to cope with like, hey, why are we going to draw things in straight lines anymore? That doesn't make sense, because nothing makes sense. The world is a nightmare.
A nightmare before Christmas. No.
Yeah, exactly. John Mulaney has a bit about flying Delta Airlines, and he redoes their jingle, and he says, "Life's a fucking nightmare. Delta Airlines." So yeah,
nice German Expressionist plane, like all pointy and crooked.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is at a time period in Germany where the economy is in shambles, but at the same time, they're doing such forward-thinking things in art and science. This is where Germany's winning more Nobel Prizes than anybody else in the world still. And they have this great flourishing in art. There's this great flourishing in not quite racial equality, as we would say, but there was certainly much more diversity. Like, you could be a black person in Berlin in certain circles, in the arts, and that would be okay. And some interracial marriage was allowed. And there were queer people, and the first gender confirmation surgeries were happening in Germany in the 1920s. Right. And all of that went away with Nazism.
Yep. Oh, boy. Yeah. And we're back to that.
There's always that right around the corner. But anyway, so German Expressionism bleeds into American horror films through the early Universal monster movies that we've talked about, like Dracula, Frankenstein, etc. And then that gets parlayed into the gangster film, and then that gets parlayed into the film noir. And then we start getting mature horror looking films that look not all the same, but there's conventions that we associate with what a horror film should look like. And they are essentially German expressionistic conventions.
Interesting. I like what you were saying about like the key light before. The thing that comes to mind immediately, we were talking about like the Addams Family, right? And we were talking about Dracula and everything like that, to where it's like used almost to the point of like absurdity. Like Morticia Addams has that like,
oh my God,
like,
it's so
like
great.
Almost like piece of tape across her eyes, like that, that really, really strong thing of light, right?
Yeah, in the second Addams Family movie with Angelica Houston, they play with it so they're having so much fun with it, and like she'll move within a shot and she'll find a key light each time. Like they have two different key lights for her set up, and in impossible places where she's lying down.
Yeah. And is that like a nudge at like Dracula? Like did Bela Lugosi, like he had like the key light like really bright on his eyes,
really bright, really high contrast. Sure. Yeah. I would say Dracula for sure. I mean, that kind of thing is also happening in that first Frankenstein movie. And The Mummy, where Karloff is, his mummy is a little bit like Dracula in that we have these big close-ups and there's sort of, there's some sort of like mind, I don't know what you call it in The Mummy, but like Dracula, he kind of mind controls you, right?
Right, it's mesmerization.
Yeah, it's mesmerization. There's something similar in the way that the Mummy is shot, where we have those long, lingering close-ups of Karloff as the Mummy. And then, yeah, I mean, this is a little bit more of a tangent, but I argue in my queer cinema class, because we look at The Bride of Frankenstein, which is a very, very different movie than Frankenstein is, even though it's the same people making it, the same director and everything. But that's a comedy, and it's really playing up a lot of the humor. It's using a lot of expressionism, horror conventions for camp purposes. It's directed by a gay man, and the lead actors, the guy who plays Henry Frankenstein is gay, and the guy who plays Dr. Pretorius, the new creation, he's gay, and they're sort of camping it all up, and they do things that I think are incredibly influential to later generations. Like Dr. Pretorius has a picnic on top of a gravestone as he's sort of waiting for things.
Oh,
he eats his lunch on top of a tomb in a mausoleum that I think are, it's not completely new because Edgar Allan Poe is a lot of that, but this is where it's like directly turning it into comedy as opposed to that macabre sort of, not that Poe was like laugh out loud funny, right? He's sort of ironic, right? And so I think that this is sort of a resurgence of that Poe macabre humor. And then you could see it directly, I think, in the works of Douglas Adam and Edward Gorey, and then later on Tim Burton. And it's like, I argue in that class that essentially the Bride of Frankenstein sense of humor, that gay humor, wins out, right? And now that's the coolest type of humor, is this Spencer's Gifts sort of in our generation, right? Like goth as rebellion. That essentially gay humor wins out, not as like a subculture, but as culture.
Right. I can't believe it took us that long to mention Tim Burton. Like we're talking about German expressionism, and it's like, yeah, Tim Burton.
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, Tim Burton and his whole deal, right? Where he's taking that. He like, it's cool to be the goth who's sitting on your own, right? Like Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice, or Winona Ryder in anything.
Yeah. Anything Tim Burton with Winona Ryder. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so Tim Burton and the Addams Family. That's yeah. All right. I think this was a really good minute. Keenan, did we get everything we wanted to say?
I think we got it, Lester.
All right. And yes, folks, we now have a listener group for the show on Facebook. It's called Compelling Conversations, an Exorcist Minute listener group. It's a private group, but just request to join and we'll let you in, and then you can be in here with us. And you can talk about the movie. You can interact with us and fellow fans. You can post questions, polls, memes, Captain Howdy cereal box art, right? Whatever you want, of course. And of course, as always, if you'd like to leave us a message, our email is theexorcistminute@gmail.com, all one word, and we'll be sure to read it. Lastly, if you like the show and you want to help us out, the best thing you can do for a new podcast that's just starting out is to leave us a little 5-star review, and that'll help other people find us, and we can keep growing this cool community. All right. So, Keenan, are you thinking what I'm thinking?
I think I am, Lester.
Folks, until next time,
the power of Tim Burton compels you.